Someone basically said that our choices create worlds. I was like, hold on, pause.
Yeah, man.
I think that's a really interesting idea, that your choices create worlds. And the choices that I've made leading up to and throughout my career working in the business have, I would say, created worlds in my life that would otherwise not exist. Worlds that I meet this director that I try to stay away from the term starving artist, but like going through that journey together and then kind of getting over it to some extent, and then seeing that person have kids. There's just so much life that happens because of the just mass amount of people that you meet.
Welcome back to Inside the Business, a Rockrose podcast. I'm the Michael. Today, I've got a very special guest, drove all the way up to Milwaukee from Chicago. The man has been in the production industry, hustling and grinding it out on short films, commercial sets, narrative productions, rocking it out in the studios at CineSpace. John White, how you doing, brother?
I am doing great. I'm loving being back in Wisconsin, man. It's a dope spot.
Being back in Wisconsin, when was the last time you were here?
I say that like I'm from here. I'm not from here. But I have fond memories of Wisconsin. I've been to Milwaukee a few times. I've done some gigs out here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did like a music video for this couple that they have I can't remember her name. They have a band, and there's a bar called the RWB bar. Are you familiar with it?
Honestly, I'm not.
It's
like
I'm
not a huge bar rat, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, me neither. But yeah, I like Wisconsin, man. And being in Chicago, it's so noisy, and it's just I like the quiet of the northern parts of the Midwest for sure.
Yeah.
But I also like getting back to the energy and the motion of the city. But anyway, good to be here.
Yeah, man. No, I'm super glad to have you here.
Yeah.
We had a little bit of a logistical snafu this morning because the trains are hard to get on time.
Yeah, but you're a legend for helping me out.
You really worked it out to get here, and we can't thank you enough.
I'm excited.
So speaking of cities, so are you from Chicago, like born and raised? Tell us about you. I mean, I know a little bit about you, but the folks at home, let's get some John lore.
Yeah, and professionally, I think, because I used to, this is slightly off topic, I used to go back and forth about what name I'm going to use, because people in high school always call me John White. They always say my first and last name.
Yeah.
And like talking conversationally, I just call me John. But professionally, I just go by John Adam White.
Sure.
Just for the sake of
John Adam White. You heard it here, folks. Look him up.
Anyway, I'm from Rockford, man. Rockford, Illinois, at the tippy top. You can literally drive 15 minutes and cross the border.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, no. Rockford's a great little town, kind of in that weird nowhere place between cities and between towns. But yeah, so you're from Rockford. So then, what took you to Chicago?
My parents are actually from Chicago. Well, not exactly. I think my dad's from Gary, but definitely had a good portion of time in Chicago. I think my grandmother as well. So I've visited there throughout my whole life, and I at some point decided I wanted to work in entertainment, and there's obviously a huge market in Chicago. And I think in high school I actually was going to tour, or I did tour a film school, and yeah, that fun fact, I did a year at film school, but at the time I couldn't afford the housing and tuition. So they introduced me to their online program at the time. But I toured the property, and my day that I toured the property, they were actually filming Transformers 4 there.
Really?
Which is pretty cool. I got to see Optimus Prime on the street, like in person. Which you're young and like you've never done the business before. It's
yeah, man.
I mean, seeing the Optimus Prime is dope. So
yeah, I was my first experience on a major set was for Transformers 2, I think.
Really? I really wanted to work on one of those
we took the train down. I was a kid,
Yeah.
My cousin and we took the train down, and LaSalle was just torn up. Art team had been out there like creating craters just on LaSalle.
Were you in like art department or like what?
I was just a tourist. Okay. And my cousin and we snuck on set. Like we actually got in a little bit of trouble. We definitely got kicked out because there were PAs just blocking off the streets. I mean, you know how
man.
lockups go.
Yeah,
But we found the crafty alley,
Okay.
and we snuck down there. Saw a bunch of the picture cars with all the Autobot and Decepticon logos
Dude,
on
that's
the
dope.
hubcaps and stuff.
That's dope.
It was super sweet. I yelled at Michael Bay from across the street.
Did he
Got a
notice
little
you?
acknowledgement from him.
Oh, that's sick.
And yeah, no, it was super cool. Yeah, so they were doing Transformers at the film school on the
They weren't
campus.
they weren't like at the film school. It was just kind of there, like at Clark Street. I mean, they do a ton of stuff on
Sure.
Clark Street, LaSalle. So it just happened to be, it just happened to be in the vicinity, and so I got to see. They were doing like a chase sequence. They had like the Russian arm, flying down the street and everything. So that was pretty cool. But anyway, I think the question was, why Chicago?
Yeah,
Or
how'd
something
you
like that.
how'd you wind up there? I mean, you
So
said that you wanted to work in entertainment. What was the focal point there? Like, what really zoned you into taking that path?
yeah, so I don't know if it's one particular thing. Another fun fact: I'm a pastor's kid, and my father speaks and has spoken just all over the world, and particularly as well on the West Coast. And he's gotten some relationships with people in the entertainment industry. And so from a young age, my twin sister, shout out to Brittany, best twin ever. My dad, we kind of got introduced to people in that world at a young age. So that was kind of a little window, like, oh, I didn't know this is like a thing. And then like even I could go further than that and just loving movies, dude. Like
That's
I
how it
have
starts
this,
for all of us, man.
yeah, I have this distinct memory of like the DVD of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. And like, yes, I was introduced to Star Wars through the prequels, but like, of course, I fell in love with the OG trilogy pretty quickly after that.
Sure. I
But
mean, nothing
there's,
wrong with that, man. I will be the first one to take on the hot take and say that the prequel trilogy is the best trilogy.
dude, especially lined up to what we have now.
Oh yeah.
By a landslide.
Oh yeah.
So I was so fascinated by that. And then like, I think some years later, I found some documentary footage of like, it was like behind the scenes look at the first ADs and like their day, working on the Phantom Menace set. And I think that was my most in-depth look into the world, like seeing, what goes on. Of course, these guys are British. So it's like, yeah, it's 5 a.m. That's like Australian. So just disregard it. And I'm gonna get the call sheets and take them over here, and just like seeing the process of everything, it just fascinated me.
Sure.
So yeah, just lots of little looks from a young age that made me interested. And I'm definitely a creative person. My first love is music,
Okay.
and my dad's a keys player, so I was always surrounded by music, and so just art in general. My mom's got a little bit of art in her, even though she didn't end up pursuing that. And fast forward to middle school, I did a lot of like theater. I loved musical theater. And
What was your favorite musical?
favorite musical in general, I don't know. I hate the favorite question because I suck at it. I
Sure.
suck at it, dude.
Top three, or just three
But
in no
three that I
particular
like,
order.
Three that I like. I guess I'm fond for Fame, like the OG Fame. Just
Sure.
'cause that's one of the shows I
Iconic.
didn't. That's one of the shows I did in high school. And what else? I really like. I don't know if this is popular. I like the Shrek musical.
I haven't seen it,
Dude,
I've heard that it's actually
It's
great.
incredible. And that was the first show I saw Sutton Foster, and she's just amazing, man. She's
Yeah.
so talented, so skilled. Oh, another favorite, I love In the Heights.
Yeah.
Which was also my first.
Yeah.
That was a first intro to Lin-Manuel. And then I found that going back to middle school, drama class, the teacher showed us this documentary of him like bringing this together. And that was another cool look at just the entertainment world and this guy kind of making his debut and bringing all these people together. And it was just a really ambitious, really awesome look at that. So it's just all these things snowballing into my interest in entertainment.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I guess that's like, if you were doing stage performance, like that's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know so many theater kids who like, I mean, it's hard to shake that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you can take the kid out of the theater, but you can't take the
Exactly.
theater out of the kid, right?
Yes. Yes.
So how did you transition from being a performer to being on like the logistics side in like production offices and on set?
That's an amazing question. I've never thought about that. I think that after middle school and going into high school, I had a few different phases. I used to be into street magic.
Street
But,
magic.
we're not
All
gonna
right.
talk about that.
We're not talking about street magic? Come
Dude,
on. I was
dude.
on set for Joe Pera season 3. We were up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Yeah.
And I think it was Joe's assistant, who did close-up magic. And he would do card tricks at Crafty because I was working craft services.
Dude, that's
and he would come up and just shoot the breeze with us, entertain us, and just out of nowhere pulls out a deck of cards and does some of the most insane stuff. And like I know about like forcing the cards and stuff.
Sure.
I have a loose understanding of this, but like the techniques that I mean magicians, let's just call them magicians,
yeah.
That they use. I mean, there's a lot of dexterity involved and like a lot of mental gymnastics. So like, I mean, let's talk about because this is all entertainment.
I'm down.
So tell me about the street magic.
It's insane. It was a very short window of my life, mainly like in seventh, I would say 7th through like the 9th grade. So that's like 3-ish years, give or take, of my childhood. And I think I was definitely probably a weird kid. Definitely not popular. I had like,
I feel like that's a common thread.
Yeah, a common thread for theater kids.
with production people in general, you know,
and production people. I think there was a point that I used to be really reserved, and going into middle school, I think I was definitely expanding and kind of really trying to express myself outside of this reserved portion of my childhood and just trying to be more social. I would look at other people and like, oh, they could socialize. I could do that. I just try to kind of mimic people. And for some reason, I can't really point to it. I have to think about this. What drew me to doing magic? I think I must have seen a show or something and then like, oh man, I want to do that. Oh, and of course, this is like, I'm sure you're familiar. This is like, we're talking about 2009-ish.
So like the David Blaine, Chris Angel era.
Dude, yes. David Blaine, Chris Angel. So they're at their like peak. And this is also like the adolescence of YouTube, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, you have 2006, super early YouTube. And then 2008, there's like so much more content, so many more types of content and tutorials. So I'm looking up tutorials. I'm like, my mom, I think, got me a magic kit at some point, and I just started doing it at school, and like started asking people, "Yo, can I show you a trick? Yo, check this out." Pick a card. There's literally videos of me on a deep dark place on YouTube I'll never reveal, and that includes some of my early just video filmmaking things when I was younger. But yeah, I just started doing it at school, and I liked the attention. Like I wasn't great at it, but I was good enough that I could get some impressive reactions.
Sure. So, I mean, so you were a performer, man. Like you were
a
performer through and through.
Thing.
Magic, theater, like that's insane. So, okay, back to the original question.
Yes.
How did that translate into finding your way into the world of film being behind the camera, right?
So going on the theme of like tutorials and things. So I was just it was a very exploratory era of my youth between middle school and going into high school. At some point, I discovered a channel called Film Riot. I don't know if you're familiar with Film Riot.
I am.
So those guys, shout out to Ryan Conley, Josh, the whole team. They really put me onto the idea that not only, well, okay, it's not just Film Riot. I actually got fascinated with fan films too.
Okay.
Because I'm definitely a nerd, a geek with like comic book films, comic books, just cool stuff. And I just started seeing young people, like people that look like me, people that have similar backgrounds, just going out there and like making dope stuff.
Yeah.
So that coupled with like groups like Film Riot putting out just really comprehensive education and like making it accessible, like, yo, you can actually do this. And then I learned about him going to film school. This was like freshman, sophomore year of high school. Because of course you're thinking about what am I going to do after high school? So I looked at him and his background going to Full Sail, and I looked at the video, the tour, and it's like this beautiful, huge campus in Florida, and they have all the equipment. They got the crane, and you know, they got like a super car on set, and you're just like, how can you not be attracted by that? So I was definitely super into film school at one point, and it just clicked after seeing all these things, like, oh, okay, there's actually multiple jobs within the film industry. And after I realized that there's so many different things you could do, and then just knowing that I also wanted to tell my own stories and things, that was kind of where I decided, was early high school, I'd say. And I was just fascinated with the art of telling stories. Just for whatever reason, telling stories on the screen is what I gravitated toward the most. I still love performing. I would still consider myself an actor, but I've kind of put it on the back burners temporarily. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, absolutely it does, man. So what was the break for you? Because I think a lot of people who will listen to this and watch our show, you know, they might be newcomers, hobbyists, people who love making things but don't really know how to break in, right? And like back in the day, it used to be just like hover around a set and beg for a PA job and like run coffee as a gopher for people, and maybe you'll get a chance, right? For me, it was leaving film school after graduation, going to Chicago, being unemployed for an entire year before a friend who was PAing found a day playing gig for me. And that's actually how I met Christy Gescheidler, who we both know down in Chicago. Cool. Shout out to Christy.
Shout out to Christy. She's great.
Kind of got me on my first show for CNBC. But so what was it for you? How did you end up getting onto your first like proper gig?
Yeah, so I think I'd have a similar break to what you mentioned, and I think it was definitely so. Okay, now it's coming back to me.
Sure.
I did a year, like I said, I did a year with Tribeca. I didn't say the name of the school, I don't think. Tribeca Flashpoint. I actually don't know if they're still active.
Sure.
But at the time, this was 2014. No, it was 2015, and I applied, I got accepted, and I did a year with their online program. And close to the end of that year, I realized that the credits I was getting, for whatever reason, wasn't going towards the degree I wanted. And the more I did it, because another side note, I was terrible at school.
Oh, same.
I was awful. I did not, I mean, not a bad student, but like a bad, I just didn't get good grades.
Were you one of those kids who, if you didn't find yourself particularly interested in the thing,
dude,
you found it impossible to apply yourself?
1,000%.
Because for me, it was like if I cared about a thing, and for me it was like writing, art classes.
1,000,000%.
I was a straight A student in those classes.
1,000,000%. Yeah, you put word, like I would say my early mid-20s, I was able to put words to that, but exactly what you just put words to for a long time, I couldn't understand why I struggled, but exactly that reason.
And I think that's something that a lot of people in our industry experience, right? And I think that's why so many people are able to continue working through, because we experience a lot of like challenging circumstances in the production world, right? Like it is not something that you just do to get by, right? Like you have to love the thing. You have to love it to death, and it's not going to be the death of the industry. It's going to be your death, right? Like you're going to beat yourself senseless trying to show this thing how much you love it, hoping that it loves you back a little bit, right? So I feel like so many people who I've encountered in the production industry have an all or nothing mindset where when they're engaged, they're dialed in. And that's why like the separation of roles on a set is so important, right? Because someone who's super passionate about art department isn't going to be the same kind of passionate about camera department, right? Someone who's super passionate about like logistics and project management is not going to be passionate about light physics and you know, establishing an atmosphere in a scene, right? Like, but all these people are hyper fixated on these individual elements that come together as a whole, and I think that's absolutely insane. So what was your hyperfixation then? Like, if you had one, what was the thing that you really dialed into that you loved the most about the industry?
I think that's a really interesting question. So we were just talking about this before we started recording. I think part of that has to do with it's very possible that I have undiagnosed ADHD.
Yep.
And not understanding that and not understanding the way that my specific brain works, and not having the tools or even the support in some areas, which is nothing to do with anyone else really outside of the fact that it's just unknown. So yeah, it was hard for me to apply myself to things that I just wasn't interested in. I went to Harlem High School in Loves Park, which is a suburb of Rockford, and I did a media, because a lot of schools, I don't know if every school has this, probably most of them have like their, you know, news class or whatever, and they do like their school news thing. So I did that, and that was a cool outlet for me to explore and express. And I guess I would say, if I say so myself, I had a knack for it. You know, I did a little bit of visual effects, and that was actually something that introduced me to kind of the editing process from an early age, because I was looking at tutorials and things. I was just, you know, doing Jedi videos and things like that. There's a ton of those videos on the internet, but I was really interested in that, and I tried to one up myself and everybody else a lot of times in school, and I'm pretty sure that teacher should definitely remember me. But what was that question? I think you were asking me about what
Like
was my fixation.
your hyperfixation, the thing that like really dialed you into the production world.
So I would say there's a video that really inspired me on YouTube, because it puts to words and sort of a mental framework the thing that really fascinates me about a lot of different, not just film, but even the packaging, because that's another, speaking of pitch decks, that's another thing that always fascinated me, is like just like the key art, the titles, the trailers, and wanting to make my own stuff, but also wanting people to actually not just be interested in watching it, but have it be attractive. I would always ask myself, like, why does this movie poster look like this? Why is it so clean? Why is the composition of it, even if I didn't have the terms at the time, why does this thing look like this? Why does this sequence feel like this? And it was kind of asking those questions that I fixated on a lot with everything I would touch, everything I would make, whether it was in school, whether it was after school, outside of school, whatever. That was probably my biggest fixation, is kind of, and to a detriment a lot of times, including just in work, being a perfectionist, for lack of a better word.
I mean, you're definitely detail oriented, and you've definitely got an eye for aesthetics. Your graphic design stuff is ridiculous. I'm going to hype you up for a second a little bit here, because like you've helped me out a lot over the years, putting together pitch decks and stuff. And the amount of care and love that you put into each page of these things. Now, we got to talk about pitch decks a little bit here, because I love exploring different elements of the production industry and the filmmaking world, right? And I think a lot of people who aren't in the know maybe don't know what a pitch deck is. Sure. So tell us a little bit about what a pitch deck is and why it's important.
So I'll try to loop this all together, because I don't want to lose that original train either. But a lot of people don't know about that. And that's it's literally a whole other industry, dude. Like the creative entertainment marketing is the term that I usually use.
Sure.
But they have like the same way that we have production and things, like they have their own ecosystem of like production, and they have like their own awards, like the Clio Awards.
Yeah.
And that's fast. That's a whole career path on its own. I don't really plan on going into it. However, I definitely have found myself, and still do to an extent, really drawn to it, if for no other reason than to like study it. I mean, I'm a huge student, like I'm a student of life, but definitely a student of both the craft in what we do as well as the business. And so entertainment marketing is a huge part of, whether it's indie or like the studio world, it's a huge part of going from the creators to the audience. And it's the materials that connect the product, which at the end of the day in film business and show business, it is a product. It's the thing that actually connects with the audience. And so pitch decks specifically, there's all kinds of different versions. I'm still developing how I would separate the different things, because there's pitch decks, there's lookbooks, in television there's a few different names for it. Some people call it the series Bible, some people call it other things, and it's just a marketing tool. It's a quick single document that really gives someone who is completely unfamiliar with your project a quick and engaging introduction to what the thing is and why they should be interested in it. And you could be presenting this to a number of different people, whether it's investors, maybe you're trying to attach talent, whether it's an actor, maybe you're trying to attach a DP, producers, whatever. So it's a quick single document that combines, it gives the log line, usually what the quick rundown of the story is, the characters in the story. In some case, like if it's a lookbook, it's usually focused more on visuals. So you might use that not even for a marketing tool, but for your team to, like if you're the director, to really articulate what the vision is visually, colors, style, and it usually also includes like a writer's statement, a director's vision statement, just all the things that really acclimates someone who's not familiar with your thing, and why they should support it, why they should be interested. I hope that's
no, I mean, and having seen your stuff, you've made stuff for me and the projects that we've partnered on in the past for both TV and feature films. I think the thing that is so fascinating about a pitch deck, like in marketing, in content management, on the agency side of things, like here at Rockrose, we create proposals all the time for clients, right? And the proposals have a similar goal as pitch decks, right? Like they give you a rundown of what the goals of the project are, what the story is if we're doing a commercial, and breaks down the different elements, showcases some like mood board type stuff to give them like inspiration materials for what the visuals will ultimately look like. But I think what sets a pitch deck, especially your pitch decks, apart is you do such a fascinatingly good job of reading the scripts in advance. So, I mean, I'm a writer first and foremost, and for me, that's the foundation of an entire project, right? I know that there are plenty of movies that go to production without a completed script, which is insane to me. I cannot fathom it.
Such a horrible reality. Yes, I agree.
But you are such a talented and gifted creative that when you read these decks, or when you read these scripts rather, you are able to impart every single page of the deck with a clearly directed vision that completely captures the tone that was intended. Like I mean, just speaking from my personal experience working with you, I never really gave you like step-by-step instructions or direction on my vision beyond a few notes for what I intended a project to look and feel like, right? and what you do page by page. Like, it isn't just a text document, right? Like, it is a beautifully composed work of art in and of itself. Like, each page is it's graphic design across the board. You're not just, typing up the different elements of the proposal. You're incorporating the proposal elements into this graphic design that helps the reader actually experience the tone and feel of the project.
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
your process like for that? Like, when you're reading a script and you're getting ready to do a pitch or a pitch deck, like, what's going through your head and how are you gearing up to make one of these things?
Yeah, and that's a question I'd like to ask you about a couple of things. Hopefully we have time to get to it.
Oh yeah, we got
But
all the time in the world, man.
first of all, thank you. That's very kind, and it's very relieving and reassuring that I always love hearing from anyone that I work with if I was able to bring their vision to life and do it justice. Uh, but yeah, I approach pitch decks and all of those sorts of materials very similarly to the way that I would approach my own thing, and I do that because it goes back to this. I was going to say this this video that I had seen many years ago, and it was in my early, still figuring out my skill set, still figuring out my interest phase, and it was about motion design. The philosophy of what the video was talking about, I can't remember the exact verbiage. It's a really amazing video, and it basically put to words this feeling that I had for a long time, going back to that question of like, why does this thing look like this? Why does this thing feel like this? And when you're first starting out, and at least this is how they articulate it, when you're first starting out, there's a disparity between your skills and your taste. And after I heard that, well, next he said, there's a disparity between your skills and your taste. And there's this pull to want to bring your skill set to it. Cause like there's things that you like, right? You have a certain appreciation for the way certain movies feel, or the way certain posters look, like, oh, I love this. I love anamorphic film, which I love the anamorphic film. It's, but there's a pull between trying to bring your skill up to the things that you appreciate. And so after I watched that video, that just, for whatever reason, just embroiled itself into everything that I do. So with pitch decks, of course, I always want to provide a great service to anyone that I'm working with. And my process starts really with what I would call the creative brief, which I used to not have a process, which was it was a very rough period, my first year or two of doing pitch decks. But that starts with the conversation that I have with the filmmaker or the screenwriter. And I want to make sure I understand what the goal is for the deck. And, secondarily, well, I would say that's secondary. Primary is getting my hands on the script, or at least some sort of treatment or whatever it is that gives me a reference for the project. And then I want to make sure I understand what is the purpose of the project or the deck. Who are we showing this to? What does it need to accomplish? What does it need to do? And after I've kind of absorbed all of that, I usually create an outline. So I have like a template that I use, and it's just a table of contents pretty much. It's got the cover art, log line, characters, blah, 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 blah. And that is the blueprint from which I actually build the deck. It's like my North Star that I can always go back to, like, this is what's going to go on this page. And then after that, it's like my research phase. So I go on a bunch of different places. I gather stills, screenshots. Sometimes I use compositing and things to create them, and I gather them and archive them into my folders and everything. It's kind of like collecting a palette of paint, I like to think of it. And from that palette, I then am able to start constructing the pages. And that, it's hard to put into words, man, what you asked me, because I think it's unique to the person.
Sure.
And I'd really try to make sure I understand. I just listened, like I listened to you and I read the script. I was like, okay, I think I see this. And I think here's another thing that helped, because you gave me a lot of assets to work with in terms of stills. So that's a huge thing too, is I'll ask for assets from the client.
Yeah, because I definitely had like inspo mood board
exactly
type stuff.
So
like,
that's a
established
huge
for
help.
myself.
Yeah, that's a huge help. And I'd like to think that just over the years I've developed a knack for kind of interpreting people's creative vibe, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
And trying to interpolate that into the visuals that I create. So that was a huge help. The assets that you gave me, like I just instantly, okay, I see what this guy's trying to do. Let's get into it. And so, yeah, I had my outline, which in this particular, I'm thinking of like Big Mood specifically.
Yeah, man. You know what? We're probably gonna in post throw some images up just for reference.
Oh, sure.
Show off some of your work.
It's very kind. Yeah, I think so. The assets you gave me for Big Mood was super helpful, and I was able to very quickly and easily see what you're trying to do. And then, of course, I usually end up throwing a bit of my personal taste into it, and then I'd always like to check in with the client and with you, and make sure that I'm on the same page. And that's kind of a Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, man.
Or maybe a rambling version.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like pitch decks are a part of the process that I think most people are not familiar with, right? And we get so caught up in our production ecosystem, talking to people who do know these things and are familiar with them, that we kind of forget that the outside world looking in has a really limited understanding of what it actually takes to get a project off the ground. But I digress. I definitely took us off the rails here a little bit, and I love hearing about the pitch deck stuff, and I want to go in whatever direction you want to go in. But I am very curious, just for the sake of like flexing and hyping you up, like what was your first job? What was your first gig that you worked on, and what are some of the biggest, coolest things that you've worked on down in Chicago? Because, like, for people who aren't familiar, like, CineSpace is, like, the closest thing we have to a proper, like, studio system in the Midwest, right? And a dozen different projects are operating out of there at any given point. And I know you've done a lot of time in production offices, but, like, take us through just, like, your journey through the Chicago studio system.
Yeah, love to. I'll caveat that by saying I'm definitely... I wouldn't consider, I mean, I'm not trying to just be like humble or self-deprecating or whatever, just try to be grounded in that. I wouldn't consider myself like a shining example of like a really super exciting story of someone that's done like all the production things.
Sure.
But speaking of what we were talking about earlier, like if you've never worked in the industry, if you're kind of looking at it from the outside looking in, especially like a decade ago, and I think to your point that you were just mentioning, I think a reason that a lot of people don't understand, outside of just, you're not going to understand an industry that you don't, like, I don't understand everything about the medical industry, for example,
of course.
I'm not exposed to it. However, I think there's a heavy element of gatekeeping. A heavy element of gatekeeping that exists both in terms of like the studio system and like how that whole world works, but even within the industry itself, which I think contributes to a lot of both turnover and just general stress. But I digress. My first gig was a short film, an indie short film is somewhere in Illinois. It's this huge bar, and it was super, there's nothing really to write home about, but I was just excited to like do stuff, man, to work. I think that was my second gig. Cause I was, I should go back to explain how I actually started doing the work. Cause like I said, I did a year at film school and I was like, this isn't for me. I don't really want to start my career in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So I was working at Red Lobster for 3 years.
Okay. Shout out to Red
Red
Lobster,
Lobster, bro. I'm thankful for that gig. I probably wasn't the greatest employee all the time, but I'm thankful for my managers, my team, and I'm thankful for that experience.
Yeah. How many Cheddar Bay biscuits have you consumed in your
Dude,
life?
don't ask me that. Evidence is probably still under my jacket. But dude, it's crazy. Like you think, especially if you love Cheddar Bay biscuits, you start working there and like it gets old very quickly.
Oh, sure.
But like you get hungry and of course you're gonna walk by and
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
grab one off the tray. But yeah, a ton. I'll just leave it at that.
Spectacular.
Too many. So I had a good experience working there. And during my time, I think it was probably an ad that targeted me, or I found it for this program. It's an industry mentorship program called Friends in Film.
Okay.
And
Was this like an online advertisement, like social
yeah,
media?
I think it was a social media ad. I found it, and this lady her name's Janet Urban. Shout out to Janet. She's great, and she's the first person that kind of she's the first person that kind of broke my paradigm on how that works breaking into the industry. Because if you're not exposed to it, like you usually think it is only film school. And especially if you're thinking about leaving film school, you probably heard from someone or from multiple someones that like, you don't need film school. It's like not the only way. So I started hearing that. And then I found this ad for this group, and she was basically saying that there's another way that like no one knows about, which is the typical like, buy my course ad kind of structure. But it got me, and I ended up going into Friends in Film, and that was the thing for me that broke me in. I just started freelancing from there, and the techniques and mindset and things that I learned in that group is what led me to doing that first short film, which was actually not the one I was describing, but it was a musical short film. Going back to musicals. Of course, I was into that. But I basically, one of the things she taught us is just to go on Facebook. There's a ton of Facebook groups, especially for our industry. You just type in Chicago and like film production or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of people post gigs, because like it's not like there's no hiring board for production.
Right.
It's largely word of mouth. So for anyone interested, if you're wondering, like it's largely referral based, largely word of mouth. Not completely. Like there's services out there such as Staff Me Up, Mandy, Production Hub. There's some centralized places that do have some gigs, and there's some paid services as well. But for me starting out, it was like Facebook. That was my gateway, and then student films, which is another one of those techniques that she shared us, because film schools have all the equipment, and they usually have the opportunities to like make stuff, and then a lot of those people graduate and then they go right into the business.
Sure.
And so I did some indie films, and my first gig was this musical short film. It was called 1964. And it was dope because they had a street lockdown, man, in Chicago.
Really?
In this side street. And it was like, there was water, and it was like this musical thing. And, I got in as a PA. So that was my first gig, and it was cool because, like I said, they have the equipment, and it was just great to get to experience that like right off the bat. And before like working in the industry professionally, I've done video, like I said, and film things like throughout my youth, video production. I had a small stint in weddings, didn't enjoy that. But that was my first foray into like the actual industry, so to speak. Other cool experiences, like fast forward, I met a guy like also that was in that program, still friends to this day. He's a really skilled dude, really intelligent. And he brought me into a show for Netflix called Soundtrack. And at the time it wasn't called Soundtrack, it was called something else, because it was called Mixtape, I think. And there was another thing on Netflix that had the same name.
Okay.
They ended up changing the name. But he got me into the production office to help build IKEA furniture.
Okay. Was this at Cinespace?
This was at Cinespace.
Nice. And that was your first time at Cinespace?
No. So or before that, I did do a little bit of background work, which is another thing you can do to kind of network and also just get exposure to that world and seeing how things move and operate and meeting people, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was, I'm skipping over a bunch, but that was a lot of what I did. I did some background work, and I did get to see CineSpace and the stages and things. I did background work for Chicago PD, APB when that was a thing, and the combination of that and the work that I did on indies and student films, which, like I said, a lot of those people went right into the business afterwards. So I ended up collaborating with them on indies that they got on, and I've met some of the best people I know today, such as the Michael himself. And yeah, so going back to the office thing, he got me in there to help build IKEA furniture, made a good impression. And up to that point, I found it very difficult to break into like what I would call the paying union world.
Sure.
Some people have it easy. Like, it's hard because I don't know if anyone else can relate to this or if you can relate to this. There's just some people that get in and they just skyrocket. They just and you're just sitting there.
Not us, brother. That's a whole thing. It's like a little lottery, right? I mean, it's a combination of personality, skill, and just like right place, right time.
Exactly.
Like, you can bust your chops left and right and still struggle to find work and maintain that momentum. And I also feel like I see that a lot with like people who are camera team adjacent, people who are G&E adjacent. Grip and Electric, shout out to the hardworking Grip and Electric boys. I got your cigarettes waiting for you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But yeah, I see those guys like, and it makes sense, right? It's the more specialized teams, like they're on set, they're grinding it out in front of everyone, the people behind the scenes in production who are in the offices or doing lockups, away from the set and the action. I find that it's often a little bit harder for them to maintain that momentum unless they're holding a stronger position like UPM or associate producer or something, right?
Yes.
So speaking of production offices, you've done a lot of time in production offices. I think people don't really know what a production office is really like. So like, give us, actually, you know what? I want to backtrack here a little bit because you're talking about doing background work and then like paid union stuff. So I've done background work. I think the last background gig I did was on Empire.
Empire a couple of times.
We were like, I was 10 feet from Taraji and we were just shooting the breeze between takes and they didn't even use my scene. I was so mad. My mom was so excited. Sorry, Mom, you didn't get to see me on Empire. But Taraji's great. Shout out to Taraji.
Yeah.
But like when you're doing the background work, a lot of people don't realize that you're getting like $80 for the day.
Yep.
Right? Like you're getting nothing. You're spending upwards of 10 hours.
Maybe a $25 car bump if you got a car.
Right. Yeah. If they're using you for a picture car, you might.
Maybe you got the right features to do like a featured role.
Yeah, like an on-set battlefield promotion.
Nothing much more than
exactly. Yeah, and like, the difference between that and even like PAing, like you're practically getting paid double that to PA for the day, right? More than double.
Yeah.
So that's a huge thing to recognize, that if you're able to get background work, and getting background work isn't that hard. Like I know that like I submitted one time to, is it 5-star casting?
4-star, yeah.
Yeah. And it was just I took a selfie, sent it in, gave them my stats, and they were like, yeah, he'll do. He'll be another white face in the crowd. That's fine.
Yeah.
And so I got my $80, showed up, and like, you get to talk to a lot of people. And like, mostly you're talking to other background actors, right? Who are all, and some of them, like, there are like career background actors. There are people who are showing up.
Some people that's what they do.
Yeah, all the time, which is crazy that you can make like a career for yourself out of just that. I don't know how much money they're pulling annually, but they're doing better than others. And they're doing what they love. And the best part is that like you said, you get a chance to network with a lot of people. I know that I talked to a dozen different PAs. Who were assisting background on the shuttle to and from set, And if you're able to do that, I feel like that's a great in. And like, like you said, it starts with Facebook. It starts with, your personal network, reaching out to who you know, finding people who are working on stuff that may not seem the most glamorous at first, but like building up your reputation is going to lead you to a dozen different places. And you sort of just got to follow those breadcrumbs for what they're worth.
Yeah.
And like really, if you can get on set in any capacity, even as a background removed from production itself, you still have the opportunity to talk to people because it is a business of relationships, right? And like you said,
Absolutely.
like referrals, word of mouth, that really is the whole thing. Like I still get calls and emails from people asking me if I'm down to produce a commercial spot, a music video, a short film, whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm obviously in-house. I'm dedicated full-time here at Rockrose. But once you've established a certain relationship, like you may experience droughts and stuff. I mean, everyone's kind of going through a dry spell right now. It's been pretty rough since COVID, and like it's just insane. Which, actually, like, let's have an honest conversation about that. Because I mean, we met 2017, somewhere around there. 2017, 2018?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So roughly. A couple years before COVID hit.
Yes. Yeah.
And we were both working freelance across the board on passion projects, on TV sets. And then COVID hit and everything goes to pot, right? The industry shuts down. I was on my way to starting my own production company. I lost clients that were lined up and ready to do commercial work.
Wow.
It was a colossal bummer, never recovered from that.
That's
but
rough. I'm sorry.
What was your experience like? Because you were significantly more involved in the studio system than I was. I've only ever done like a handful of studio gigs, mostly day playing and stuff. But what was it like on the inside?
Okay. What was it like on the inside? This was 2020, so yeah, it was pretty much like 1 year after I first started doing more, because like I think I did literally like a couple like union projects or whatever before I started working in the production office, like like day playing, like once or twice, and then background stuff.
Yeah,
that was the most exposure I got into it. And so 2019, like I said, my first time working in the production office, I was building IKEA furniture for a day, made a good impression.
Yeah.
And I got to do the full season. They did not get renewed for a second season, but I did that show. Really great experience. Really, the thing about the office is, and I'm gonna bring it full circle, I promise.
Sure.
The thing about because like for me at least, I never imagined I would ever be I would never gravitate toward working in an office job. Like it's just no, I'm not going to work at a desk or in a cubicle. But working the production office and working in an office, like there's definitely a lot of crossover, but it's not the same thing at all. And especially if you're interested in the business and you're interested in creating stuff and doing the thing, that is where it happens, dude. Like that is where like the conversations that you only like think about or imagine about, like between the producers, the talent, like that's where it really goes down. And at first I wanted to have more of a 50-50 mix of doing on set, and I love set. I'm always going to be on set. And even maybe a 60-40, 70-30 doing more set than office. But what ended up happening was I realized how much, in my opinion, how much more valuable the experience of the production office was than pretty much anything I did on set, which I still did plenty of set work through that period and to this date. But I stuck with it, man. I stuck with it. My first year was rough because I was rough. Like it wasn't bad, and like they liked me, but there was just some things with being efficient, and I would say my mid-20s to my late 20s, it was really a period of getting more in tune with how my mind works and like how I just things that I get hung up on that made it difficult for me when I first started out working in the production office. And so it was definitely a school of hard knocks, definitely a hard kind of training period. So I did that show. Later, I wasn't sure if they would bring me back, but that production coordinator, shout out Margaret Thomas, the Margarets as they're affectionately known. She works with another woman named Margaret. Amazing, and she's definitely she definitely kept me. She definitely held me to the fire. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But it was a great thing. It was exactly what I needed, and that was kind of the trickle, the lead domino that led to me just being really shaping my professional edge more than ever. So she brought me back to do Batwoman season 2 in the
R.I.P.,
production
man.
office. R.I.P. to the show.
To Batwoman. Didn't it
Oh
end?
yeah, it did not get renewed.
Yeah.
So and that was dope. That was dope. I enjoyed that a lot. It
The
was
DC
also
projects are super cool.
What'd you say?
The DC projects are
Oh
super
yeah,
cool.
I mean, and plus it's a comic book project, so I was of course I'm like psyched. I'm like, yes, I get to work on a comic book thing. But yeah, I still had a lot to learn. I was gonna have a lot to learn. At that time, this was 29, like the latter half of 2019 or maybe early 2020. Hopefully I'm not getting those dates mixed up. But I got a little bit more experience, and I got to go on set for a few days when they were shooting. So that was dope. You see the suit, you're on like the rooftop at night. It was really cool. Like seeing the lockdown, seeing the production, man, shout out to art department guys, art department and props department. They are just,
they're the heroes of it all, man.
They're the heroes.
Like people consistently ask me, like, how do you make a movie look good? I'm like, you put good stuff in front of the camera.
Gosh, yes.
Like art department, like you can have the best cinematographer in the world, and if you have a terrible art team,
exactly,
like, it's not going to look like nothing.
All of it is so important.
Yeah.
So I got to see the dusted up cars all laid across the street, the interior stuff. But anyway, I did that show. And I had a dry spell. Again, I would imagine largely for the reason because I was still early in my career. I didn't have a ton of relationships, and my first experiences were a little bit rough. And then COVID happened, and so I was at home for like many months, as were most of us. And then in government and in the industry itself, there's a lot of conversations happening to decide who is essential and who is not. And even that's like maybe a controversial topic of like, why were we essential over certain other professions? Not that I don't think we're essential, or not that I'm upset that happened, but it's a very interesting and crazy time.
Yeah.
So I didn't work for a while. Like I think there's a period where a lot of us were, sitting on the edge of our seats, kind of like nail biting, like, is something going to come back? Are they going to figure it out? Are they going to figure out, there was like this huge thing of like, the safe way forward or something. I can't remember the name of it. It was like this kind of, mantra, movement, to figure out protocols and procedures that would allow us to continue working, that would allow all of the different workers.
Sure. And then we got like COVID team and stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The birth of health and safety, or COVID team. There's a few different names for it, but that was the birth of an entirely new department, entirely new line of work, which is now kind of, shut down, hopefully permanently. But
we love giving people work, but we do not love having to deal with COVID.
Absolutely not. So glad that's over. And here's the crazy thing too, is like, as you can imagine, it adds like an astronomical amount of expense to producing a show.
Oh yeah, just expediting the tests and everything, like
the
checking
tests,
in to like get
dealing
on
with
set.
having to like shut down the entire production, or sometimes it was like a matter of sending a certain department home. So even that in itself, as like someone who's still newer to the business and working in the production office, that was very educational in itself, getting to see how the unit production manager, how the line producer, how the executives, how the studio, how the network all kind of come together to have these conversations to solve these problems that would come up as a result of the pandemic and still be able to produce a show. So there was just a lot of things that changed in terms of how we were able to operate or not operate, what expenses had to be paid for that we normally wouldn't pay for, what things you're allowed to do, the morale, the sort of psychological element of having everyone's faces covered up for such a long period of time, especially if you knew someone. And if you didn't know someone and then like working with them again after you've never seen the lower half of their face, it's just a weird time, dog.
Oh my God, man. It was literally, it was Joe Paris season 3. That was our COVID season. We were like in the heat of it. We were masked up on set.
Yeah.
It was check-ins every day with health and safety.
Oh goodness.
Like
ask Christy about
yeah, no
getting the
kidding.
test, and like we would joke about certain people would like be real aggressive with the jab of your nose.
Oh yeah. I mean, shout
And
out
some
to the
people
bloody
were
noses.
gentle,
Yeah.
like really gentle, like, oh, you are, please.
Yeah,
keep
no, and the
yeah,
other ones you
so-
can feel it behind your eyeball, and it's
Yeah.
great. But it's crazy because you got used to seeing everyone with their masks on. You
Yes.
recognize them by the top half of their face. And I remember there was one day at lunch where I'm sitting with my buddy, our masks are down,
Yeah.
and people are looking for me, calling my name right in front of me. I'm like, got a shout. I'm right here. They have no idea. You're like, it's crazy how much.
You don't even think about that.
Right.
How much you rely on just the subtle cues of facial expressions and things.
Or my favorite was one of our art department guys had very strong cheekbones, and I was led to believe that he might have a strong jawline too. And the
Oh
mask
my
came off, and he
gosh.
just had the roundest, just
Dude,
the
yeah.
flattest chin. I'm not going to name names because he's still a very
we don't wanna
handsome
do
man. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I mean, you have no idea what's sitting underneath there.
That was absolutely a constant running, like, whether you want to admit it or not, everybody's talking about like, oh my gosh, she looks like that. Oh, he looks like that. He has a full beard. He does not look like he should have a beard.
Yeah. Oh, and not for nothing. If I shave this thing off, I don't have a chin. So like, I'm wearing a mask constantly. But yeah. So I know that I was personally unemployed for 6 months before I got a commercial job in early autumn of 2020. And I only got like 2 more jobs that year. And they were not long running jobs. These are commercial gigs, like 2 or 3 days each apiece. Right. How did you get by during the dry spell? Because I think that that's something that scares a lot of people about the freelance world, is that it is feast and famine, right? Like you're either working a 4 to 11 month show, or you're working on and off commercial gigs for days and weeks at a time and praying to God that you're going to get a text from a PM, a producer, a coordinator, whoever, that, they're going to invite you on, a best boy, that they're going to ask you like, hey, are you available for this thing? And that thing could be next week. It could be tomorrow. It could be in 3 months. Right. So it's like learning to manage your finances, learning how to anticipate those dry spells. No one anticipated COVID. No one anticipated being unemployed for months at a time, right? During the busy season. So how did you get by?
We're talking about during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, or just in general, honestly. But let's start with the pandemic.
I mean, in full transparency, there was a long period of time that unemployment was what floated me to an extent.
Same, yeah.
And that was also the time, I think it was the year that I started doing pitch decks professionally. And so that became a new stream of income, not a huge stream, but it was enough to kind of supplement me. And it was also interesting because at that time, I wasn't fully living in Chicago, I think. I met someone, I met this producer on this traveling food show I did some years ago.
Okay.
Called Scraps for A&E.
Okay.
It's just this chef that had this like old Volkswagen bus that was like converted into, it had like seasoning and like a countertop and everything. But the concept of the show was that you took the things that most people waste, like banana peels, for example, or other things, and turned them into, healthy food. but I digress. I met this producer, and she like travels, like she would travel all the time between, like, I think New York, Chicago, LA, and she was a huge help to me, like, early in my career, just kind of breaking in and learning some skill sets. And she told me that she couch surfs. And I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah.
What? You just crash on people's couches? Like, yeah, I just have friends. Like, I don't need to get an apartment. And so at the time during COVID, I didn't really I still to this day, I don't know how I managed to pull this off. It's kind of insane, but I did try that. Like, the friends that I met, in my early days of production, I would couch surf. That was just a very tumultuous situation. And then COVID hit, and I ended up just going back home. And then, like, I think I got a couple small gigs here and there that I would literally drive from Rockford. It's like a 76 mile or something drive, hour and a half. And I would drive back and forth, but the majority of the time I was at home. Unemployment helped. And the project that we met on, it was a pilot. I was like a PA at like 3 a.m. And I ended up sticking with them for some months, and I did some of their, I had like a little bit of skill with graphic design, and I noticed some of their packaging wasn't bad. It's just, it could be better.
Sure.
And like going to that theme of like my draw to like, how can I make my thing look as clean and polished as, like, I hate the term industry standard, but it's just the best way I can describe it. That industry standard look with like your logo, your et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I was really just interested in, because I had done a ton of sets, well, not a ton of sets, but a decent amount, but I didn't have a way to get kind of that behind the scenes development look. And that's like a whole other world as well. Like, not just entertainment marketing, but the world of development, and like really fleshing out the soul of a project and bringing it to life, and then doing kind of a little bit of the entertainment marketing thing with pitch decks and what have you. So I stuck with them, and I offered my service as a way to kind of get a look at how they do things, and also just express myself and build my own skill. So that was around 2020, right when the pandemic started. And I realized, this is kind of cool. I actually kind of enjoy doing this. And it's a cool way, especially if I turn it into a profession. I can meet other filmmakers that are doing their own projects and maybe get involved in their projects, or just build relationships in general. So I went on a site called I think it's called freelancer.net or something. And I got this, I found this listing for this guy doing a short film in New Jersey. And I applied, and I got it. And
did you go out to New Jersey?
No. Well, he did invite me because
okay.
I worked in production, and as I was learning more about his project, I was like, because at the time I didn't have any experience like producing, but like I wanted so bad to just be given a shot to like finally kind of take that leap and do that work. And he did invite me, but I forget what specific reasons, it just didn't end up happening. So I did a project for him, and financially that did help a lot during the pandemic. Fast forward some months, and the industry kind of figures out a way to bring projects back, and the world in general, new protocols were put in place. And, I was kind of working quasi regularly after that.
So let me ask you this, since we are running out of time, and we got to keep it to that tight 1 hour mark. It's all right. It'll be a hour and a half special. We'll call it an extra special episode with John Adam White and the Michael.
Oh, cool.
It'll be fine.
Oh, that's very kind.
But I mean, conversation is what it is, and I don't like to keep a track on the clock.
Feel free to chop this up.
No, it's great. I mean, the folks at home love it. We're gonna get some great clips from it. But
you gotta do if you want to watch the rest of this episode, check out my Patreon at Rockrose Production.
Yeah, no, let's monetize this thing because we're hungry out here.
Yeah.
So, all right. working towards wrapping this thing up.
Sure.
What is your favorite thing about this industry? What is your least favorite thing about this industry?
Favorite thing about this industry? There's probably a couple things, but if I had to just highlight one, I would say, I mean, this is true of, I suppose, anything that you love, but certainly the ability, the opportunity to get to collaborate with just the most incredible and inspiring and interesting people, to make something that's never existed before and get paid for it it's definitely a blessing, man. And I think that has led to some of the most impactful experiences and memories in my life, because of the nature of it. There's no real rules per se. There's things that make the film world run, so to speak, but it's ever evolving, and there's so much life to be experienced. I mean, there's so much life to be experienced outside of what we do.
Sure.
But the nature of just meeting so many different people, and some of those people you stick with, some of them you don't, but the ones you do stick with, that it just, I'm going to quote a bar that I think is a bar from the show that this first season, the first season of the show that I'm currently working on, called Dark Matter.
Okay.
And I was watching the show, for research purposes, and I forget which character said it. I think it's Jason Dessen, but someone basically said that our choices create worlds. And I was like, hold on, pause.
Yeah, man.
It was kind of a similar feeling. I don't know if you ever watched WandaVision.
I did, yeah.
So
yeah.
It was a similar feeling to when you heard that line, after all, what is grief if not love persevering? You're just like,
yeah, man.
The screenwriters of the world collectively groan like, why didn't I think of that?
Right.
Anyway, I think that's a really interesting idea, that your choices create worlds. And the choices that I've made leading up to and throughout my career working in the business have, I would say, created worlds in my life that would otherwise not exist. Worlds that I meet this director that he's I don't like the term. I try to stay away from the term starving artist, but like going through that journey together and then kind of getting over it to some extent, and then seeing that person have kids. I still don't have kids, but it's all good. There's just so much life that happens because of the just mass amount of people that you meet. Something that I don't like, I think the thing that I despise the most, and I try to actively war against it in different ways, is gatekeeping. And I think it's something that is just toxic and harmful because I think a lot of people get caught up in the idea of fame or being famous and the glamorousness or the perceived glamorousness of the business. And yes, absolutely, what we do is not exactly like a typical job. And like there are a lot of really cool experiences that you wouldn't otherwise get in other lines of work. Totally. But there's so much more to it than that. And I think particularly in Chicago and the Midwest in general, I can't speak for everywhere, but just my personal experience and the experience of some friends of mine as well. I think there's a lot of, I would say mostly older people that have been in it for decades for whatever reason, like whether it's fear of getting taken over or whatever it is. Just I really don't like gatekeeping because it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't really even help you, because if anything, you want to be able to not just duplicate yourself, but sharing the education and the skills to people that are earlier in their career than you only makes the experience and only makes the project better, and the tide rises all ships. And so that's my least favorite thing for sure, is I would say it's dying, thankfully, the kind of lingering air of petty gatekeeping nepotism
Yeah.
that can make this amazing business something that is at times very discouraging and disheartening.
Yeah, man. I think that's a super important thing to land on, is there's ultimately room for everyone to chase their dreams, right? Like, that's why we get into this industry,
Yeah.
is to chase down what it is that we love. And I think there are few things that discourage industry professionals as much as the people immediately above them, passively or overtly standing in the way of them leveling up or testing the waters with their
Right.
skills that they've not yet monetized, right?
Yeah.
And like, we shouldn't have to lie, cheat, steal our way into those roles, right? We shouldn't have to wait for someone to be sick or dead or quit
Yeah.
or whatever to leave the world of PAing, to get out of the office and onto set, or get off set and into the office if that's what you want, right? Like, there are plenty of people who are trying to produce, who are trying to get into writers' rooms. You know, not everyone's wanting to be on set in the middle of that version of the action, right? But, you know, there's, especially with all the different platforms we've got out there, there's so much room for people to succeed across the board and test their skills. And that's the one truly good thing about the oversaturation of the marketplace, because it is an oversaturated marketplace, but having all the platforms that we have between the internet and television, it gives so many people an opportunity to share their voice, provided that they're given the opportunity to, right? And I think that the thing that we're facing right now in the industry is an epidemic of franchise materials that get in the way of newer voices being heard and recognized for the value that they actually carry. But I do think that we are very rapidly approaching the nexus of that downfall of the
1,000%,
franchise
yeah.
materials, right? I think people are generally exhausted by seeing the same stuff over and over again with the same titles over and over again. And I think that we are going to see a rise in original materials championed by micro distributors, putting out indie features that are, I mean, I'm going to keep talking about it all year, but Hundreds of Beavers was made in Wisconsin and is distributed on a micro distribution model.
Wow.
Just they're handling it themselves. These guys are operating off of like a $250,000 budget, making a movie that is ranked right below Dune 2 as the second best reviewed movie of the year on Letterboxd.
Wow.
You know, I think we're going to see more and more of that happening as original voices fight against the machine, right? Because I think that the machine has gotten in its own way, and that the gatekeeping has led to people trying to just go around the gate, right? And that's how you get things like Hundreds of Beavers, where they're making it their way and distributing it their way and still finding massive success, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, down with gatekeeping. Open your not to sound corny as all hell, but like, open your hearts and minds to the starving artists, the people who are entering the industry. Like, everyone's got their own ideas, and they have a lot of value to add to the industry, right?
Yeah. And I want to caveat that too. I mean, to your point, as far as everything with the micro distributors and the exhaustion of the franchise era, I think that ultimately is speaking of the machine, it's a machine that is in a relationship with, because it's a business. There's a machine, and then there's the consumer.
Sure.
And ultimately, the consumer is going to dictate.
Oh, 1,000%.
However long it's dragged out, however many peaks and valleys it has.
Yeah.
That's ultimately going to win. And that to me, that's also true when it comes to like the discussion with AI, which I don't want to derail too much into.
Oh,
into that.
we'd need a whole other hour and a half.
But what I was gonna say is that I think what I was saying with gatekeeping, I really stand by that. But there's another element to it that isn't always gatekeeping, and there's just a reality that when you're playing with someone else's money, especially talking about like hundreds of thousands, millions, or more of dollars, there is a very real aspect of it that is you have to kind of guard, because it is, so much of it is for now word of mouth. And like if you bring someone on that isn't competent or capable to handle whatever responsibility they're given, and that's how I like to think of all the different positions, because it can be discouraging sometimes to like look at other people that are higher up than you. Mm-hmm. But I've early on, I think I broke that frame and realized that everyone has a specific responsibility on the production team, or like regardless of what department you're in, the same way that a coordinator has responsibility to coordinate a lot of the assets and things that make the show run, is the same way that PAs have a certain responsibility that are essentially in a lot of ways the glue between all the other departments and the support and the facilitators. But I say that to say sometimes it's not always gatekeeping. There's also an element of just like, do you have the actual skill? Have you proven yourself to be trustworthy, to be responsible for this thing?
Oh,
because
sure.
It's all so interconnected. So I just wanted to say that I do recognize that there is an element of people have to be, nepotism exists. Like that's a thing totally. But at the end of the day, people, especially at the top, you have to be capable and you have to deliver the results. So that's always an element to it. But gatekeeping is very frustrating for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, wrapping things up here, tell us how we can promote you. What are you working on right now? What role are you in? What kind of jobs do you want to see yourself in? Tell the people where they can find you online, social media handles, your projects to look out for.
Yeah, man. I can be found on LinkedIn, Instagram at I am John White. That's JOHN and then White like the color. I currently do development and design work for Gallico Media as well as Pollock Films, and that's just gallicomedia.com or pollockfilms.com. And then here in the Midwest, I do development work with Shady Mills, and we have a number of features that are kind of in development. So look out for that. I myself am a filmmaker, storyteller, and I just want to get good. And that's been a huge part of my journey, is just trying to get good. And I'm working to be able to produce and direct my own things. And currently I'm working in the production office for Dark Matter Season 2. So if you're not subscribed already, what are you doing, man? Check it out.
Check it out.
Free promo, Apple TV.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's what I got.
Well, John Adam White, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, thank you again for watching this episode of Inside the Business. I am the Michael, and as always, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, get those notifications, click that bell. Click that bell.
Click it.
And we'll see you next time.